everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com and it's Friday, so you know what that means. It's my favourite time of the week. That's right, it's time for my Wrestlers of the Week. A massive quality week of wrestling. So without any further ado, let's get straight into those honourable mentions. So many to talk about here, right, so let's start off with everyone who was in the Raw Gauntlet. I really enjoyed that match. And the OC as well, or the Bullet Club or whatever, Gallows and Anderson, who won the Raw Tag Team titles. A whole host of names as per usual who had good matches in the G1 over in New Japan, but not quite enough to get onto the list. So the likes of Tanahashi, Evil, Sonata, Kenta, Naito, Goto. There's so many. It's so difficult when the G1 rolls around to structure Wrestlers of the Week. I think I'm doing an okay job. I hope so, guys. I don't know what that was about. On now to Shug's House Party in ICW. Stevie Boy returned and claimed the ICW Championship as like a mystery opponent for Wolfgang. Jackie Polo and Kushida had a good match. Two quite weirdly thrown together opponents because Jeff Jarrett pulled out, but it still made for an exciting matchup. Leighton Buzzard and Joe Hendry as well had an excellent match. One which could really solidify Leighton Buzzard as a future star of that company. And of course, an excellent character-filled performance from Hendry as per usual. Joe Hendry! There was also a match that I haven't had a chance to see, and I don't think anyone who wasn't there live has yet had a chance to see. Over in PWG, it was a six-man tag match between Bandido, Flamita and Rey Horus, and the team of Black Taurus, Laredo Kid and Puma King. Loads of Lucha Libre action. Meltzer says it's one of the best PWG matches in recent memory. He said it's in fact the best one since that infamous Ospreay, Seidel and Ricochet match against the Bullet Club, against the Bucks and Adam Cole. Remember when Adam Cole was in the bloody Bullet Club? Bloody hell. And finally, just a personal shout out as well, because as you may have heard yesterday, WCPW, or Defiant Wrestling, did close its doors for the last time. And just on a personal note, I would like to thank everybody who was ever involved with that promotion and give them a personal honourable mention. Not just the wrestlers, but the referees, crew, staff, commentators, announcers, everyone who came to a show. It was a wonderful time, a really fun period in my life, and I'm going to miss it dearly, but you know, we move on. Oh, it's really sad, actually. But the show must go on, and the show on Friday is, of course, Wrestlers of the Week. So now, on to my top 10, a man who ruled the roost on NXT this week, Pete Dunne, and used to appear in WCPW, Pete Dunne. Yes, Pete Dunne had a very, very strong week on NXT. Not only did he win in the main event, defeating his former tag partner and the man who betrayed him, Roderick Strong, but he also stood tall over the reigning and defending NXT North American champion Velveteen Dream as well. They are, of course, all heading into a triple threat match for that title, and it looks to be a very exciting one. Now, personally, I would love to see Pete Dunne win that title. I'm a huge fan of Velveteen Dream, and I enjoy the fact that he is a champion, but I think that it would be even better if Pete Dunne were to win that title. Maybe even go a bit heelish, maybe even emphasise the fact that he's from England, he's a British champion, British strong style and all that, but he's the North American champion. I think that would be an interesting way to go. To be honest, I think it's guaranteed to be a pretty good match regardless of who wins, but just on a personal note, I would really like to see Pete Dunne win that title. I can't wait for that match. I enjoy the interplay between all three people involved, and I think it's going to be a banger. And this match on NXT TV against Roderick Strong was a good one too. I think it was the correct decision to have Pete Dunne win, and I'm excited generally to see him make the switch from the UK division over to the proper NXT show. Of course, which he's been a feature of in the past, in the War Games match and all that sort of thing, but I'm really interested to see what he can do over there, assuming he does become a full-time member of the NXT roster. Next up, it's number 9. Oh, it's Will Ospreay in at number 9. 2 points for Will. He's struggling for points these days, so it's pretty good that he's managed to grab a cheeky couple there. He had this week one of my favourite matches of the G1 so far, so you might be saying, why is he so low down on the list? 2 reasons. The first one is that his other match this week against Bad Luck Fale was one of the weakest matches of the G1 so far. Not that it was the fault of Will Ospreay, it was more just the way the match was booked, and there was a very, very frustrating and disappointing DQ finish. Not every match in the G1 can be a banger, but it does sort of hinder the amount of points that I was going to give him. But his other match this week in the A block was an all-England encounter against Zack Sabre Jr., 2 of the finest British wrestlers of their generation, and I'm sure that in years to come they will be looked back upon as 2 of the best British wrestlers ever. That really doesn't seem to be in too much doubt. Both Ospreay and Zack had a really, really good match. They matched up so well. I have no doubt they've clashed countless times before, but it was really nice to see them work each other's style a little bit, or not so much. Well, Zack didn't really work Ospreay's style, but Ospreay was getting involved with technical wrestling, counters, good old World of Sport wrestling, just on fast forward really. It was a very intriguing matchup, and also Ospreay lost, which I don't know if many people found surprising. I'm not sure if I did too much given the fact that Ospreay is still technically in the junior heavyweight division. In fact, he is the champion of the junior heavyweight division. But yeah, that doesn't take away from the fact that it was an excellent match and one of my favourite matches of the G1. But that brings me on to the second reason why I haven't given Ospreay too many points, and that's because this week was just a really strong week, not just in New Japan, but elsewhere too. So even though it was one of my favourite matches of the G1 so far, it just happened to come along in a week where lots of great stuff happened. I'm sure that everyone's just really disappointed that Ospreay's not getting loads of points. Now let's cross the line and go over to All Japan for the All Japan Summer Action Series Day 2. I bloody love the name that All Japan give to their little tours and events. They don't care, they just throw words in and make it sound exciting. And to be fair, quite often, it is exciting. So this week's number 8 is Zeus, who had a match against the reigning Triple Crown champion Kento Miyahara, one of the best wrestlers in the world today, and it was another excellent match. The pair had a great feud in 2018, which featured a lot of great matchups, and that seemed to continue into 2019. Because they'd faced each other quite a lot of times before, some people might have been thinking, oh, Zeus might take the title from Kento in this one, but he wasn't good enough to topple the current ace, the undisputed ace of All Japan. It was a very exciting match. I loved it, and again, it's one of those ones where maybe in a bit of a less impressive week, Zeus may have been finding himself with a little few more points in the bag. That was a very seedy action I just did. All right, governor, down the frog and toad, out the apple and pear. I'm incredibly northern, I'm not from London at all. When it comes to promotions like All Japan and Noah, and they're really good at covering Dragon Gate as well, I really enjoy getting the insight of the writers over at voicesofwrestling.com, one of the best sites in my opinion for really recapping Japanese wrestling very well, not just New Japan, but the other big promotions too. This comes from Gerard Di Trollio, who said, it was a simple but effective story of Zeus using his strength to break free of Kento's shutdown German suplex attempts. Zeus almost even managed to escape from the shutdown German suplex that eventually put him away. So it was a styles clash of size versus, I guess, technical prowess and speed, and in the end it was Kenta who was able to triumph. And even though it wasn't the most complex match in terms of storytelling ever, sometimes simplicity is a good thing, and this seems to be one of those instances. So commiserations to Zeus for not, capturing that Triple Crown championship from Kento, but on the plus side, he is still the king of the gods and sits high upon Mount Olympus with all of his fine wines and all of his many children and demigods and all the rest of it. Now let's go over to New Japan and the ace of the promotion, the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada, in at number 7. This week, Okada had a hugely historically significant match against Kenta for reasons that I'll explain in just a little while if you're unfamiliar. And really, I'm surprised he won. I thought Kenta was going to pick up the victory, but instead Okada picked up what could be considered, to be honest, one of the biggest wins of his entire career. Certainly, at least, one of his biggest G1 wins of all time. Now, the reason this is such a big deal, if perhaps you're only familiar with Kenta as Hideo Itami over in NXT, before that, Kenta was one of the biggest stars of Noah, and Noah is the promotion that came from All Japan. Everyone defected, like Noah taking his arc and going away, and this set up Noah. It was Misawa who was like the spiritual head of the promotion and everything. Unfortunately, he did pass away in 2009, I believe, but people carried on his legacy, and one of those was Kenta throughout the 2000s and the 2010s before he went off to NXT. Now that he's back in Japan, Kenta rocking up in New Japan was a big shock, the other side of the coin really, and the fact that he was going up against Okada, it was almost like the two figureheads of two rival promotions going at it, and not even just the two figureheads of two rival promotions, but just two sides of the Japanese wrestling spectrum, New Japan on one side and Noah, and by association All Japan, on the other side. And that's why I really thought that Kenta was going to win, because a similar thing happened a few years ago in like 2016 or 17 I think, with Naomichi Marufuji, one of the figureheads of pro wrestling, Noah, who did in fact beat Okada, and that led to a title feud between the two, which Okada was eventually able to win. I thought they were just going to replicate that storyline, but instead of Marufuji representing the Noah history, it would have been instead Kenta. That's not what happened at all. Okada just picked up the victory, and I was really surprised. And again, this was a wonderful match, but I just really, in my heart of hearts, really wanted Kenta to win, so that's why I haven't pushed Okada further up the Wrestlers of the Week league table, or given him more points this week rather. Yeah, it was still very impressive. I just thought if Kenta had won, that would have led to a title match that could really have plugged the gap between the end of the G1, the end of the summer, and Wrestle Kingdom next January. But it wasn't to be, and that shouldn't take away too much from the fact that it was an excellent match and well worth checking out. Number 6, Zack Sabre Jr, because he beat Will Ospreay this week. What a legend. Did us all a favour, so well done, Zack, mate. Number 5, no, let's stick with Zack. for just a second. As I mentioned a little bit when I was talking about Will Ospreay, actually, this match was an excellent stylistic matchup. We had Zack trying to ensnare Ospreay in various different submissions and traps, Ospreay using his agility and his speed and his very underrated technical game as well to escape from all of Zack's various different attempts. Eventually though, Zack was just too strong. There were several moments in this match where I was just reminded what an excellent wrestler Zack is and what a brutal wrestler he can be as well. Especially the part where Ospreay was on his knees just beckoning Zack on, and Zack just was laying into him with full force, just big massive penalty kicks right into the chest that gave that horrible, like, hollow, echoey thud rather than the more like the slap of a chop. It was more like just a doosh, and then Ospreay would like beckon him on again and he'd just kick him even harder. It was proper brutal. The ending came when Zack did ensnare Ospreay in the octopus stretch or some submission like that. He does so many variations of submissions and some of them have very long names like orienteering with Napalm Death. It's really hard to work out which one he's put on, but it was a modified something because he sat back down, dragging Ospreay down to the canvas like sort of like an alligator just ensnaring some prey, and it made for a very dramatic finish. Ospreay tapped out pretty sharpish and Zack picked up a much needed victory. He's not had the strongest G1 so far kayfabe wise in terms of points, and that's led to some very entertaining outbursts of frustration from him in the promo segments backstage, but he picked up a big victory here and moves on in the tournament, and I think honestly he's going to have a banger of a feud. I don't know who against, but he's going to have an excellent feud for that British Heavyweight Championship in the aftermath of the G1. Next up, number 5, one of the, I think, most underrated guys going into the G1 this year, and one of the ones who's since impressed the most with his performances week by week, and that man is Juice Robinson. Juice had 2 excellent matches this week. The second one wasn't as good as the first. It was a decent, pretty strong match against Tetsuya Naito, but the first one against Tomohiro Ishii was just absolutely fantastic. As Richard pointed out, who I believe is editing this video, so shout out to you, Richard, hooray, good job, buddy. As Richard pointed out, just before I came in to shoot this video, that match was actually like first or second on the show, or in terms of tournament matches, it was the first or second tournament match of the night, and it just was kind of a sleeper hit out of nowhere, because it was kind of earlier on in the night. I don't think anyone expected it to be as good as it was, but it was a really good back and forth encounter between 2 really well-matched opponents, actually. Yes, there's a huge size difference, but there's not a huge mass difference, if that makes sense, because Ishii is a dense little stone man, and Juice is big and strong and tall and American, yeah. It was really cool to see. I'm just loving the fact that Juice is getting opportunities to shine in longer matches against some top-level Japanese opponents. It's really good to see, and I'm wondering, he didn't ever turn heel when Moxley beat him and took that US title. I thought we were going to see heel Juice Robinson, especially when he cut his hair, but instead he's just become a more intense version of his babyface self, and I think that's an interesting way to go too. You can really see it in his matches. He's pulling out a few more victories, I think, probably, than he would in a normal G1 year. That's not statistically fully true, I've not actually checked that, but it feels like he's doing better, and I think that's the most important thing, and hopefully he gets a nice little push, like I hope Zack Sabre Jr. does, coming out the back of the G1. Now let's go to Beyond Wrestling in America, and let's go to the show Beyond American Rana for a 60-minute Iron Man match featuring this week's number 4, David Starr. Starr was the heel of this match, matching up against a babyface Joey Janela, and it was excellent stuff. The pair have had not a few that I've followed that closely, but people I've talked to, and thank you for everyone, by the way, who messaged me about this show and told me to check it out, because it was a really fun show. And for a show that had a 60-minute Iron Man match, it actually flew past pretty quickly, which is a very impressive feat. But yes, the pair have apparently had a really intense feud in Beyond that goes back quite a while, and this was the sort of the culmination of all of that, especially I guess with Joey Janela about to head off to AEW exclusively, which may have led you to think that Starr would pick up the victory, and that's certainly what the earlier stages of this match seemed to suggest, with Starr picking up 3 quick pinfalls, relatively quick for an hour-long time limit, and racing into a 3-0 lead. But one of the best things about Starr as a wrestler is that he's electric to watch on offense, especially when he's a babyface, but when he's a heel and being sneaky, it's really great watching him get his ass kicked, which is a great thing for any heel to be able to do, especially when you've got someone across the ring from you who loves a bit of weaponry, like Joey Janela. The turning point came with just a sick kendo stick shot, like a headshot right to the head, which turned the tide in the favour of Janela. He was able to claw his way back into the match and level things up at 3 apiece. And I'm going to talk about the latter stages of the match in the next bit, number 3 this week, because it's Joey Janela. Great performance from David Starr. Let's get on to number 3. I wonder who it could be. Number 3 is Joey Janela, right? Janela picked up the victory in this match, which I think I was surprised about. No, I wasn't, because I knew the result before I watched it. But it doesn't matter, because if I hadn't known the result, I would have been surprised at Janela picking up the victory. Yes, he was the babyface, and yes, it was a long, grueling, emotional match. But with him leaving and going to AEW, I would have just assumed that maybe he would have put David Starr over on his way out. he did put David Starr over, just not in the way you might think. So weapons got involved. There were more and more sick and dangerous and risky spots. There were Canadian destroyers all over the place and all that sort of thing. And this wasn't one for the purists. I think at one point somebody no-sold the Canadian destroyer, but the long and short of it was they were able to level the scores with like seconds remaining. Joey Janela pulled a desperation super kick out of nowhere and picked up the climactic victory, the pinfall that sent him over the edge and gave him enough points to win as time expired. Wonderful stuff, really well timed, and an excellent display of cardio by both men. Wasn't too surprised about David Starr being able to go that long, because he's wrestled plenty of long, grueling matches, and he's got that amateur wrestling background. He's obviously very well conditioned. But Joey Janela, man, he proved that he's not just, as Cornette might suggest, or someone like Cornette, he's not just, you know, a spot monkey deathmatch guy. He can wrestle a match with story and structure and effort all the way through, and he had a wonderful performance, which is why he picks up 8 points this week. He also cut an emotional promo afterwards, burying the hatchet with Starr after such a long and grueling and intense rivalry. They hugged it out, and he basically said David Starr is the best unsigned wrestler in America, or maybe he even said the world. He really put him over huge, and that was a very nice thing to see, especially since he didn't need to, given the fact that Starr had lost the match. So that was great to see. Oh, it's nice when a feud ends with them all being friends again, isn't it? Sometimes works. Next up, number 2, a man you could argue who has been the best Japanese wrestler of 2019. It's a really tricky one. It's between him and 2 others, but it's the All Japan Triple Crown champion and the current ace of the promotion, Kento Miyahara. Yeah, it's between Kento, Ishii and Okada, and obviously Ishii and Okada have had a bigger platform upon which to ply their trade, but Kento has been putting on some absolutely fantastic matches for about 2 years now, maybe 3 years. He's been a wonderful, wonderful talent. I'm not suggesting that his overall legacy is more impressive than someone like Okada's, but you could very, very convincingly argue that in 2019, he's actually had a better year than the Rainmaker. This week was one of those weeks with Kento again showing us why he's so great in that match that I've already talked about quite a lot against Zeus. So instead what I'll talk about is something that I again learned from that Voices of Wrestling article that I cited earlier, which is that there doesn't seem, apparently, because I don't keep up that regularly with All Japan's product, I just watch big, good matches when they're reported upon for this series, but apparently there is no obvious next challenger for Kento, which raises a little bit of a problem. I'll contrast what's happened in Dragon Gate with Pac recently. Pac was beating guys like KZ and I think Dragon Kid maybe, yeah, and every challenger who came up against him could feasibly have won, but Pac continued to dominate and eventually lost to the next ace of the promotion, kind of, in Ben K. There doesn't seem to be anyone else on the horizon really for Kento to lose the belt to, which is fine given the fact that he puts on really, really good matches, but title reigns are made by excellent feuds, and if there's no one yet ready to step into that slot, I just wonder what All Japan are going to do next. It's not necessarily a bad thing, they could do something really interesting, but no one apparently seems to really know what that is yet. So, intriguing times, I wonder what's going to happen. And finally, my number 1 and my wrestler of the week, for the 3rd week in a row, I don't think anyone's done that before. It's the Stone Pitbull, Tomohiro Ishii. Honestly, Ishii's been putting on one of the most incredible, consistent G1 runs I've ever seen. And I've not been watching the G1 for that long, but everyone has great performances every year. So for this one to be the most impressive that I think I've ever seen, that really is something. He's been matched up against a variety of opponents over in the B block. He's been doing fantastically every single time. I think my favourite match of his so far was the one against Moxley, but the matches that he had this week, although a little bit more understated than some of the ones he's already had in this tournament, were still absolutely great, just on such a high level. And it's not just the fact that he's having these great matches, because, as I just said, everyone has great matches in the G1. It's because he's doing it day in and day out. This week, he took on Goto in what was a very good match. The pair had an excellent G1 match last year, I think. This one wasn't quite as good, but it was still very, very good. And then that match against Zeus, which just came out of nowhere and absolutely stole the show on that night. Ishii is the MVP of the G1 by a country mile, to the extent where I believe it was Squared Circle on Reddit did like a midway through the G1 poll where they asked different questions. So it's like, who's your MVP of the A block? Who's your MVP of the B block? And then you'd click Ishii, and then it'd be the next question was, who's your non-Ishii MVP of the B block? Which I think was a genius question, because everyone's MVP is the Stone Pitbull. And finally, this year and last year as well, sort of, I finally got Ishii. For a while, for a long time, he was one of those wrestlers that I could recognize was a phenomenal elite level wrestler, but never really clicked with me in the same way that some of my very favorite wrestlers of today do, like Omega and Ospreay and all that sort of thing. And Gargano, just to give a non-New Japan example. But At the same time, I now kind of get why Ishii's so good. Just a little bit of history on that. Like, basically, when Ishii was having his rivalry with Shibata a few years ago, Shibata was like my guy. I absolutely loved Shibata. And me and Sam would have little arguments in the office because he loved Ishii. And I would always say, no, he's not. He doesn't tailor his style to his various opponents. He's just, you know, oh, I'm going to no-sell this and I'm going to no-sell that. No, he doesn't. He's the very opposite. He sells when he has to, and when he does, it makes his opponents look fantastic. Almost in a bit of a Brock Lesnar way. Not as extreme as Lesnar does, on a more like consistent and regular level, I guess, but when he does it, it's still very, very effective. He's also capable of having great matches with just about everyone, which is something that we've learned this year in spades. He's phenomenal, and I honestly had reservations about making him Wrestler of the Week for the third time. But I just honestly, that was what I was going to do. I couldn't think of a better candidate for this week. So 3 weeks in a row, Tomohiro Ishii. I want him to win the G1 so badly. I'm not even certain if he mathematically can by this stage, but I really want him to. He deserves a title shot at Wrestle Kingdom. I don't care if other storylines are more compelling or more relevant. Give Ishii the Wrestle Kingdom main event, New Japan, come on. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the big bloody league table. Will Ospreay's lead has been cut because Ishii has jumped up to second place after an astonishing few weeks with another big 10 points. Okada's up to 5th, and then from one ace to another, Kento Miyahara is up to joint 6th. A battle of New Japan and All Japan going on right there. A little bit further down, David Starr's up to 12th, just behind Ricochet. Some, of course, like Joey Janela said, saying that he is the best unsigned American wrestler. Zack Sabre Jr, one of England's best, up to 15, just behind him. What on earth's going to happen as the G1 draws closer to a finish? It's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks for absolute certain. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.